latest reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin could hold a summit as early as next week. According to the Kremlin, the potential meeting comes as Trump seeks to broker an end to Russia's war on Ukraine. Asian stocks rise as investors brush off Donald Trump's 100% tariff threat on semiconductors, focusing instead on growing optimism that the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates next month. Israel's Security Cabinet is set to meet shortly to discuss the future military plans in Gaza amid growing speculation over a possible full takeover of the besieged Palestinian territory. President Emmanuel Macron urges a tougher stance from Paris in an intensifying standoff with former North African colony Algeria over issues ranging from migration to France's position on the disputed Western Sahara. And this July was recorded as the third hottest globally since records began, with the average worldwide surface air temperature reaching 16.68 degrees Celsius. Hello and welcome. Let's start with the escalating tensions between the US and South Africa. Trump has slapped 30% tariffs on South Africa, the highest on any sub-Saharan African country. And just ahead of the imposition of the tariffs, President Cyril Ramaphosa called the US president as the country scrambles to secure a trade deal with the US. As per Ramaphosa's office, both the leaders have agreed to further engagements on bilateral trade matters. However, securing a deal with the US still seems like a long battle for South Africa. While Trump wants Pretoria to give in to his demands for policy changes, President Ramaphosa-led ANC has vowed to not succumb to pressure. The ANC has said that the government will not bow to Trump administration's demands, even if it means its leaders face US sanctions. South Africa's relations with the US have plummeted since Trump's return to the White House in January. In March, Washington expelled Pretoria's ambassador after he criticized Trump's Make America Great Again movement. The US president has a whole list of problems that he has with the Ramaphosa government, from alleged grabbing of white people's lands and genocide of white farmers to racist employment policies. Trump has consistently accused the Ramaphosa government of discriminating against the whites. Next on the list is South Africa's genocide case against America's close ally, Israel. American lawmakers are also considering a bill that seeks a review of Washington's bilateral ties with Pretoria because of its foreign policy stance. South Africa says Trump's interference in the country's domestic and international policies have brought ties to a new low.
Yeah, I think it is. It is a very low level, particularly because since the last 30 years, there has been disagreements with the U.S. administration on a number of issues, but the diplomatic lines of engagements have always been open, and there has not been a situation where like we do now, where some of the issues come into the domestic sovereign space, like the issues of expropriation, which are dealt with by our courts, by our laws, and there is sufficient safeguards domestically to handle them.
The US is South Africa's third largest trading partner after the European Union and China. And as Trump hardens his stance towards the African nation, its economy is bearing the brunt of it. Trump's new tariffs will place 30,000 jobs at risk in a country that is grappling with high unemployment rates. The Trump administration has also threatened to review South Africa's eligibility under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which grants duty-free access to U.S. markets for thousands of African products. Trump's hostile trade policies are not only hitting South African exports, but also the very shipping routes through which these exports reach the U.S. Danish shipping giant Maersk recently announced that it will discontinue direct cargo shipments between South Africa and the U.S. from the 1st of October. This means that now the South African exports will be rerouted via European hubs, increasing transportation costs and time. Costlier supply chains will further threaten South Africa's export competitiveness. Though the shipping giant claimed that this move is a part of operational restructuring, it is clear that Trump's growing aversion towards South Africa is what is driving these shifts. Now, for more on this, we have with us Patrick Bond. He is a political economist joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for being with us. Welcome to Firstpost.
Thanks very much for having me, Alison. Great to be back with you.
Now, President Ramaphosa's preemptive call to Donald Trump ahead of the 30% tariff imposition signals diplomatic urgency. How do you interpret his move in light of the ANC's parallel stance of defiance against U.S. pressure? And what might this dual strategy mean for South Africa's foreign policy calculus going forward?
It's such an interesting problem. We don't know enough about yesterday's telephone call, for example, or about other behind-the-scenes offers that are apparently not good enough for Donald Trump. That included buying $12 billion worth of U.S. Liquefied natural gas to change South Africa's main energy baseload system from coal, or the import of some of the chickens that had been under scrutiny, or a few other, sort of more symbolic efforts, like a game of golf that President Ramaphosa desperately has been trying to get Trump to agree to, so he will come here to Johannesburg for the G20 summit in November. But you're right that there's a bifurcation, because on the one hand, it's a very smooth and diplomatic Ramaphosa. On the other, the head of the African National Congress, Fikile Mbalula, here's what he said yesterday, a couple of sentences, quote, because he's explaining why the fear that the U.S. has that South Africa is with BRICS, with countries like Iran and China and Russia now flip-flopping, an enemy of the U.S. So here's Mbalula's denial. Quote, "We didn't get money from Iran. The United States imposed sanctions on Iran. We're not trading with Iran, even if they have oil. Even the CIA regards itself as the best intelligence outfit. It can tell you it's not true that the ANC got money from Iran. We didn't get any money from Iran." So this is the rumor that was about $6 million a year and a half ago to bail this African National Congress out of debt. And I think these denials suggest even the tightness of South Africa within the BRICS to Iran means, I believe them, they're not actually doing much more than a couple of $1 million worth of trade per year. It's mostly importing carpets and exporting coal.
And how might potential U.S. sanctions on ANC leaders, should they materialize, impact South Africa's political landscape and foreign policy direction ahead of upcoming elections?
Well, you get a sense, me reading the Fikile Mbalula quote, that there's a sort of attraction now. We saw it with the Indian leadership and the Brazilian leadership to actually defy Trump. Maybe they learned from the Chinese, which was a sort of reciprocal tit for tat, in which the Chinese seem to have come out a bit more ahead by being more let's say, confrontational. So will that attract sanctions against Mbalula, maybe against President Ramaphosa? It depends if this bill does go through. If it does, what we saw from similar sanctions against the leaders next door in Zimbabwe is it didn't really matter very much. It may be that as a very rich South African, Ramaphosa has some assets in the US, he would probably try to clear those out quickly and not make the mistake the Russians did. But I'm not sure it's much more than symbolic.
Right. And Patrick, to what extent does the proposed US legislation framing South Africa as aligning with terrorist organizations and adversarial powers like Russia, China, and Iran signal a broader shift in how Washington views Pretoria's role on the global stage?
Well, I laugh because when I was a student in the US in the 1980s, there was this fear of a terrorist who had been in jail for a couple of decades named Nelson Mandela. And they never took him off the terrorist list until finally it was too embarrassing in 2008. So he left the presidency in 1999 as one of the great statespersons of the 20th century. And so that word terrorist makes many South Africans just roll their eyes. But I think the fact that Iran had defended itself against Israeli attacks and made sort of a managed bombing of a Qatar airbase belonging to the US, and that wasn't really considered worth escalating over. Or that the Russians were very close to Putin, to Trump, and maybe will become so again if the bilateral goes off. And then the deals with China are at least stabilizing. But of course, that's the bigger long-term question, whether now that the US is exiting so much, the climate talks, the World Health Organization, emergency and humanitarian aid, making such a mess of global value chains, not even coming to the G20. Maybe this is a moment where South Africa says, actually, those guys in the US are not much good. Maybe they shouldn't even be in the G20, so they don't host it next year. Maybe we should be closer to China. The problem is that China's dumping products in South Africa, and there's a lot of defense by the government against the below-cost dumping. So new tariffs are being imposed, it looks like every couple of weeks, against Chinese products. So it's a tense situation with many contradictions embedded within it.
Patrick, it's always great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Our next story is from Ghana, where a tragedy unfolded as two senior ministers died in a helicopter crash. Ghana's Defense Minister, Edward Omane Boama, and the Environment Minister, Ibrahim Murtala Mohammed, were among 8 people killed on Wednesday when a military helicopter crashed. Others who died included Ghana's Deputy National Security Coordinator, a former Agriculture Minister, and the Vice Chairman of the governing National Democratic Congress.
I have the unpleasant duty, sadly, to announce a national tragedy involving the crash of a military helicopter this morning around the Adansi area in Ashanti region. Government regrets to announce the demise of the following persons in the tragic crash: Dr. Edward Kofi Omane Boama, Minister for Defense; Alhaji Dr. Ibrahim Murtala Mohammed, MP, Minister for Environment, Science and Technology; Alhaji Muniru Mohammed Lemonad, Acting Deputy National Security Coordinator and former Minister for Food and Agriculture; Dr. Samuel Sapon, Vice Chairman of the National Democratic Congress; and Mr. Samuel Abuaji, a former parliamentary candidate.
The crash occurred in the southern Ashanti region, killing everyone on board. The Z9 helicopter took off from the capital of Accra and was en route to Abuasi, but lost control and crashed into a forested area. The delegation was on its way to an event on illegal mining, a persistent environmental crisis in the country. Ghanaian armed forces have launched an investigation to determine the cause of the crash. President John Mahama has declared 3 days of national mourning starting Thursday and suspended all official engagements for the rest of the week. Flags across the country will fly at half-mast. The president, through his chief of staff, expressed condolences to the families and to the servicemen who died in service to the nation. The incident has shocked the nation as Ghana grapples with the loss of 2 prominent ministers. The defense minister, Boama, was playing a key role in regional security as jihadist activity in neighboring Burkina Faso continues to rise. A former communications minister, Boama was appointed in January after Mahama returned to power. In May, he led a delegation to Ouagadougou as part of Ghana's diplomatic outreach to the junta-led governments in Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. He was also set to release a book titled A Peaceful Man in an African Democracy. Environment Minister Mohammed was leading the country's efforts against illegal gold mining, which have destroyed farmland and contaminated water sources. UN officials have described him as a committed environmentalist and deeply respected in global circles. Ghanaians have poured out their grief and shock as the country mourns a major political loss.
The news, I thought it was a joke. Then I confirmed it from the radio. I said, okay, fine, then let me find out from the social media. I've seen that, yes, it's something that is true, that something like that has happened. And it's very sad. It's very sad because this is a big loss to the nation.
It's a pity and tragic loss to the nation and to me. I don't know them personally, but their submissions on issues of national interest make me like them. I couldn't continue eating my food upon receiving this tragic news.
Replacing these 2 senior ministers will be no easy task. Both were handling critical portfolios amid growing security threats and environmental crises. As Ghana mourns, questions remain over what caused the crash, with investigations now underway to uncover the truth behind this national tragedy. And shifting focus now, tensions are escalating between Sudan and the United Arab Emirates over Abu Dhabi's alleged support to the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, currently locked in a brutal civil war with the Sudanese army. In the latest development, the Sudanese government has spoken and they have said that this move comes... Abu Dhabi has not officially confirmed the ban for passengers traveling to and from the Gulf nation, but the move comes right after Sudan's Air Force claimed to have shot down an Emirati aircraft carrying Colombian mercenaries as it landed at an RSF-controlled airport in Darfur. Now, the Sudanese army claims it killed 40 mercenaries who were allegedly deployed to support the RSF. Sudanese media reports say that the plane took off from a Gulf airbase carrying dozens of foreign combatants and military equipment destined for RSF strongholds in Darfur. The army, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has long accused the UAE of arming the RSF, including by supplying drones and advanced weaponry. It says that the UAE has been doing it through airports under RSF control. Sudan has also cut diplomatic ties with the UAE in May over these allegations. The UAE has consistently denied the claims, despite numerous reports from UN experts, US officials, and international organizations.
De París, de Londres.
Sudan also cut diplomatic ties with the UAE in May over these allegations. The UAE has consistently denied the claims despite the numerous reports from the UN experts, US officials and international organizations. Abu Dhabi has rejected the claims that Sudan has downed an Emirati jet. But Colombia's president has confirmed that his government is investigating how many Colombians were killed and is working to repatriate their bodies. He has condemned the incident, vowing to ban mercenary activity, calling it a trade in men turned into commodities to kill. Now, earlier this week, the army-aligned Sudanese government accused the UAE of recruiting and funding Colombian mercenaries for the RSF, claiming to possess documents as evidence. Reports of Colombian fighters in Darfur have circulated since late last year and were confirmed by UN experts. Many of these mercenaries are former soldiers and ex-guerrillas, some of whom were previously deployed to the UAE in Yemen and elsewhere in the Gulf. Sudan's war, now entering its third year, has killed tens of thousands and has displaced over 13 million and triggered the world's worst hunger and displacement crisis. Foreign interventions have only deepened the chaos, with both sides accused of war crimes and backed by different international actors, often with little to no accountability. The war's end remains as elusive as ever. And while speaking of foreign players in Africa, Russia cannot be left out. It is a big, powerful player with deep influence across the continent. And one of the ways through which Russia maintains its stronghold is through security partnerships, with deployment of mercenaries as a key step. By capitalizing on the growing anti-West sentiment, Russia initially expanded its military cooperation with African nations by using the Wagner Group of mercenaries. But in recent years, Moscow has been pushing to replace the private Wagner mercenary group with Moscow's state-run Africa Corps. Now, the latest African nation where Moscow is pushing for the swap is the Central African Republic. For years, the Wagner Group has maintained its presence in the African nation, protecting the president Touadéra and his government. The Russian paramilitary group also helped the president win a 2023 constitutional referendum that could extend his power indefinitely. And in exchange, they've enjoyed access to the country's rich minerals, including gold. But now Russia wants to replace Wagner with the Africa Corps in the country and is reportedly asking for huge payment for further security services. But the Central African Republic is reluctant to agree to Moscow's demands, as it believes that the private-run Wagner would be more effective than state-controlled Africa Corps. Moreover, the country prefers to pay for services with minerals and not cash. In a similar move, Russia replaced Wagner mercenaries in Mali in June. And what is driving this transition is Russia's fear of yet another uprising. In June of 2023, the Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin mutinied against the Russian military leadership, sparking the biggest crisis in President Vladimir Putin's 2 decades in power. Prigozhin severely criticized Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and later that year, in August, the Wagner head met with the same fate as Putin's critics often do. He died in a suspicious plane crash. Since then, Moscow has been developing the Africa Corps as a rival force to Wagner. Both Wagner and Africa Corps are Russian paramilitary groups, and it is estimated that 70 to 80% of Africa Corps personnel are Wagner veterans. Yet the two are different organizations. While Wagner is a private military group, Africa Corps is under the direct command of the Russian Defense Ministry. While Wagner actively engages on the battlefield, the Africa Corps is set to serve in a more advisory capacity. Since the African nations have had a fallout with their former colonial rulers like France, Russian support is crucial for them, and Moscow, being well aware of this, is taking full advantage of the situation. Now it remains to be seen, what will this growing reliance on Russian mercenaries cost these African nations in the long run? And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.